United States Senator Tim Scott is a tireless advocate for smaller government, lower taxes, and restoring fiscal responsibility in Washington. Growing up poor in a single-parent household in North Charleston, Tim learned the importance of faith, hard work, and living within your means. He did this by understanding the basic economic principles that our friends in Washington so often forget. And with the same determination he brings to advancing conservative principles in the Senate, Scott grew from his humble beginnings to build one of the most successful all-state agencies in South Carolina. An unbridled optimist, Senator Scott believes that despite our current challenges, our nation's brightest days are ahead of us. As a teenager, Tim had the fortune of meeting a strong conservative mentor, John Moniz. Moniz helped instill in Tim the notion that you can think your way out of poverty and that golden opportunities are always right around the corner. The American dream is alive and well, and Tim's story is a concrete example of that. Ladies and gentlemen, U.S. Senator Tim Scott.
Eight to 10 minutes, by the way.
I had 10 minutes.
And if you didn't hear the first time, I think it said 8 to 10 minutes.
Yeah. That's what I hate about young people. They interrupt you.
Alan, it looked like you interrupting him.
I always wanted to be tall until now. If I fall on this thing, I'll kill myself. Y'all don't have child labor laws in Greer? Where'd Alan go? I think his grandparents were 45, right? But anyway, I guess that's West Virginia now. Bottom line, but nobody here from West Virginia. But bottom line, we're glad to be here, and the government screwed up, so thanks for having us. We'll try to fix it. Speaking of young people, glad to have Tim here. We seldom get to appear together, and let me tell you about Tim. He is really one of the nicest people I've ever met. Very smart, speaks his mind. He's from Charleston, who is the county council chairman, so he knows how to govern. And to that guy in North Carolina, we don't really care what you think. Stay in North Carolina. What I thought I would do is just let you know that if I had to describe myself, a lot of people do that for me, so I think I'll take a chance to defend myself a bit. I'm a Chamber of Commerce Republican without hesitation and without apology. The Chamber of Commerce represents, to me, what's good about the country. How many of you are bankers? Who's not a banker? Got any lawyers here? Got anybody from the savings and loan? We'll start a fight with the bankers. But the bottom line is that most of you compete during the day for business, right? I know, because everybody's tried to give me a loan. The bottom line is the Chamber takes people who compete against each other during the day, and they come together to move the community forward. What would happen if Washington took that on for a day or two? Can you imagine? Why can't Republicans and Democrats do what y'all do? Compete, but still work together. To make the community a better place. Call me naive, but I think we can. And it's pretty dysfunctional right now, but I'm hopeful that maybe we've turned a corner. We've got a budget. I'll be at the Inland Port dedication tomorrow. Anybody coming? That's a huge deal. Tim's been terrific. He understands the Port of Charleston, but he's been terrific. The Inland Port really is going to take the leverage we have from the Port of Charleston, move it up to the upstate, right in the middle of the I-85 corridor, and it's going to knock the socks off of this community. Greer, it really has been a lot of fun coming to these things over the years. Bottom line, immigration. Anybody want to talk about that? Not many people like talking about it because it's a hard problem. What I'm trying to do as your senator is to be a conservative voice for our state, represent our interests, and make Washington more like South Carolina. It is broken. But the way to fix it is that we're not short of people who yell at each other. That we have no shortage of that. We've got to find ways to solve problems. And I just mentioned immigration as a really difficult problem that needs to be solved. 80 million baby boomers are going to retire in the next 30 to 40 years. I will be one of them. And who's going to replace the workforce? When I was born in 1955, there were 16 workers for every retiree. Today there's 3, and in 20 years there'll be 2. Tim and I are single, we don't have kids. I guess we're part of the problem. You know, we have a demographic challenge. As the baby boomers retire, they go into Medicare and Social Security, right? Well, how do your children and grandchildren pay the bill that comes due in the next 30 or 40 years? When you got 2 people working for every retiree, and 50, 60 years ago you had 16. That puts a real burden on your kids and your grandkids. Well, the way you solve this problem is you do what Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan did. You find a solution to save Social Security and Medicare from bankruptcy. That means that people in my income level and Tim's income level are going to have to take a little less out and put a little more in. I'm willing to do that because when I was 21, my mom died. When I was 22, my dad died. My sister was 14 at the time, and we lived over in Central. Anybody been to Central? We owned the liquor store in Central. We got any Clemson fans here? Met most of y'all. We loved it when the Tigers played at home. And we had a pool room, and that's where I learned everything I need to know about politics. But when my parents died, we moved in with an aunt and uncle who worked in the textile mills that are all now closed, and they never made over $30,000 in any year in their life. They're the nicest people in the world. Neither one of my parents finished high school, and Tim's got one heck of a story to tell. So I think we come from a part of life where we've all struggled. Everybody struggles. If it weren't for Social Security survivor benefits, that $300 plus check, it meant the world to my family, to me and my sister, my aunt and uncle. She received Pell Grants to go to college. You know, when my mom got sick, we got wiped out. If you own your own small business, you're one illness away from losing your business, and that's not right. I tell you that story just to let you know I get it. If it means that we're going to have to tell younger people they got to work a few years longer and save Social Security, let's give them 20 or 30 years to know they got to work a couple years longer, but they'll do it if it's good for the country. If people in my income level and some people out here in the audience, if we need to give up our subsidies for Medicare, why should the federal government pay $109 a month to help buy my prescription drugs when I retire? I can afford to do that. And I could give up a few bucks for Social Security retirement because I'll have other retirements. If we'll do these things, what Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did, we'll save Social Security and Medicare from bankruptcy. But if we don't challenge ourselves and we don't ask America to make the changes on our watch that the future generations will need to survive, shame on us. And the reason I'm in the Senate is because it gives you a wonderful platform to do things that need to be done. Immigration needs to be solved because who's going to replace the 80 million workers who retire? You know, Strom had 4 kids after 67. Any volunteers? I didn't think so. Well, somebody clapped. An optimist. We're demographically challenged. We've got $2 trillion of corporate earnings parked overseas that are American-held companies that have businesses outside the country that have generated $2 trillion in profit. They won't bring it back into the country because of a 35% tax rate. We're one of the few countries in the world that double tax you. So I'm pushing for a one-time good deal, a 10% tax rate. Get that money back into the country, take the revenue from that money to put in our roads, our bridges, and our ports because they're all collapsing. I'm a conservative. I believe in the principles of being a Republican, but I believe in being an American more than anything else. Ladies and gentlemen, our country is very much challenged domestically and internationally. And how do you get out of this mess? Do what people before us did. Put the country ahead of self. And do what the chamber does every day. Work together for the common good. One last thought. I've talked about domestic politics, about reforming entitlements. We need to flatten out the tax code, eliminate some deductions, and pay down some debt because we're $17 trillion in debt. I will do that as a Republican if our Democratic friends will help us reform entitlements by adjusting the age and means testing. That's the big deal. We know what to do, we're just afraid to do it. But we don't talk enough about the world in which we live in. It's hard to do business when the world is on fire. Radical Islam is on the march. Remember 9/11? Do you remember where you were at that day? The one thing I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the only reason 3,000 Americans were killed on 9/11 and not 3 million is the radical Islamists couldn't get the weapons to kill 3 million of us. Do you believe if they could, they would? That is the challenge of our generation. This young Marine can shoot as good as he sings. I want to acknowledge these young Marines who came here tonight, but we're here to talk about business. But you can't talk about business unless you have security. You can't have a contest of ideas unless you have an open society where freedom is allowed to prevail, where people can pick their leaders, not have the leaders forced upon them. Ladies and gentlemen, business and democracy requires sacrifice. So I want to acknowledge that everything we do here tonight, we owe to our men and women in uniform. God bless them all. That's as close to 10 minutes as any senator will ever get.
We have had a great working relationship, Senator Graham. I look forward to continuing to talk with you about military issues and the challenges that we face as a nation. There's no one who knows our military in the background because he serves in our military. And so God bless him and his service to our country in many facets. When you said, you know what we should call Tim? I was thinking he's going to say dummy or something like that. Thank you for defending me on the North Carolina guy. Appreciate that. I'll tell you though that I know that some of you have y'all heard about my attacks recently? Yeah. Okay.
It was shameful, and Tim Scott is one of the most decent people in politics today.
Well, I will tell you that. Thank you. When I woke up that morning and I saw the attacks, I thought to myself back to the days when I was in high school and I was flunking out of high school and I was failing world geography. I think I'm the only senator to ever fail civics.
You wouldn't know it by looking at it.
And then I went on to fail Spanish and English. And when you fail Spanish and English, they don't call you bilingual. They call you ignorant because you can't speak anything like that. So I kind of understood why he was saying dummy at that time, in other words. And one of the reasons why I focus so much of my attention on the issue of education is because I've done it wrong. And then I got it right. And as a nation, when we look at where we are, comparatively speaking to the other OECD or high-income countries, we were 14th, 17th, and 26th in reading, math, and science, and now we're getting worse. If we're going to have the workforce of the future in our country, we're going to have to fix the foundation of our workforce through education. And having seen the response to amazing teachers who came to my rescue and a mother who believed that sometimes love, it has to come at the end of a switch. And she loved me a lot. And when you combine those two together, loving teachers and a great mom, you find yourself in a position to build back the foundation of a person, of a community, of a state, and a country. And so one of the reasons why my platform starts with education is because I believe that education is the way that we unleash potential. And when I think about the success of Greer, I think about the fact that the foundation is so solid. I was talking to some folks in the audience earlier. The success of Greer isn't the fact that we've attracted industry. The success of Greer are the people that makes the industry possible. And when I was a small business owner, I joined my chamber, got very actively involved because sometimes you need some help when you're signing the front of the paycheck, but you can't sign the back for yourself. And so you join the chamber looking for some misery-loving company kind of concept. Anyone understand what I'm talking about? Thank you very little. Anyways, so the second part of my agenda really does focus on what happens when you do produce the education system that is outstanding in the world. you look at the jobs market and you start asking yourself, what skills are necessary so that places like Greer continue to be the hub of industry, a center of excellence throughout the entire world? And I think about the skills that are necessary to make sure that the next iteration of our success as a nation starts in places like Greer. And so you'll see that I focus a lot of my attention on the skills gap. 4 million jobs today unfilled in America because we can't find the folks that have the skills. And so one of the things that we do in a piece of legislation that I've sponsored, the Skills Act, is we try to find a way to fill that chasm by providing more training to the end user using our technical colleges and training centers so that we can continue to make sure that we have the workforce of the future, even if we have to re-educate our adult workers. When I think about America's future, it's so easy for us to focus our attention on the fact that we have $17 trillion in debt, that we run annual deficits of $700 billion this year, $1 trillion last year, that we saw $630 billion come out of the pockets of small business owners on January 2nd, that we're looking at a healthcare fiasco that causes more money to come out of the pockets of small business owners. But in the end, what I've learned this year, and I knew it when I was a kid, and this is simply this: business owners and professionals in the worst market, if you give us enough time, we figure it out. We need certainty and predictability in the workplace. And if we can find those two things, we will succeed. And in spite of the government, we've seen the response of the business community standing up, being counted, creating jobs. And if we could get the government out of the way, lower taxes, reduce our regulatory burden, the engine would hum, I think, close to 7% GDP growth. I think all things are possible if we can get the right or the secret sauce together.
So, surprise, I have the honor of asking them a few questions. Now, these are not my questions, these are questions from the audience. So, the first one, when you speak with business people, you often hear them use the word uncertainty. They are uncertain about taxes, they are uncertain about the recovery of our economy, they are uncertain about the Affordable Health Care Act. What should we be doing to bring more certainty and sustainability to the business community, Senator Graham?
Well, uncertainty is spawned by Washington not being able to do a whole lot of things to give you certainty. Agreed? Like passing a budget. You know, we've had one continuing resolution after another. Thank God we passed a budget in the normal course of business. So for 2 years, we'll have a number to shoot toward. But Tim nailed it. Obamacare, I think, is strangling the economy. Every Democrat voted for it, every Republican voted against it, and I think is coming home to roost in terms of what we said would happen. But from a Republican point of view, we got to do more than complain about Obamacare. We need to come up with our own health care reform, because the old way of doing business didn't work either. Monopolies are not good. I mean, before Obamacare, you had very small choices in individual states. Tim and I believe in buying insurance wherever you can get the best price. A little malpractice reform would go a long way. And quite frankly, if you smoke, you ought to pay more. Just basic, simple things. So what I think will happen on the tax side is that the big deal that I described may yet happen. Have you heard of Simpson Bowles? Mm-hmm. Let's do something like that. Let's simplify the tax code to make it easy. I don't know if how many of you are for a flat tax? Okay, what about a fair tax? I don't care, just as long as we do something other than what we're doing. Simpson Bowles eliminated a lot of deductions and took some of the money to buy down rates to get us to a corporated 25, not 35, and put some money on the debt. But what they also suggest is that we reform entitlements. 2/3 of the federal budget spending is in entitlements and interest on the debt. 1/3 is the discretionary budget. So if you really want to stop us from becoming Greece, we have to do the big deal. And I think tax code reform, where Republicans will embrace simplifying the tax code and dedicating some revenue to debt reduction, will spawn some interest by Democrats to reform entitlements, and that will give you certainty. As to Obamacare, the one thing I'm certain about, that this was never about the 10% of people who are uninsured. We want to help the uninsured, but do we really want to destroy insurance for the rest of us? I think it's about destroying private sector health care, herding us all into exchanges where the government will run these exchanges. I think it's doing through the back door what they couldn't do through the front door, which is universal coverage where the government decides who gets what. I think that's a bad idea for America. And until you get Obamacare replaced with a bipartisan product, you're going to have a hard time growing your business.
My first bill in Congress a couple of years ago was the Rising Tide Tax Reform Act of 2011. And its goal was to lower the corporate tax rate down to 23%, allow for permanent repatriation so that we could have an ignition, so we could ignite a fire around economic development, and specifically for small businesses as well. When I think about that construct, the second iteration, if I have the opportunity to do so, to create certainty for our business community, is I would look at the manufacturing opportunities and lower the manufacturer's tax rate to about 20% for a couple reasons. With the natural gas prices being what they are today, we find ourselves in a competitive position where we could attract industry to America that would stay here permanently if we could continue to have an energy environment that was conducive for landing here, and then a tax environment that kept them here. If we did those two things, I think we would see an amazing renaissance throughout our state. We're seeing it throughout the country because of our energy opportunities, which is another obvious example of why we need to make sure that the type of regulatory reform that happens takes into consideration first the people, because we're missing that component. 9 million jobs a day are focused around the oil and gas industry. We could see that number grow by more than 1 million jobs in the next decade, and add another $1 trillion to our GDP if we kept the federal government out of regulating things like hydraulic fracking. So we have a strong opportunity to continue to see more manufacturers, more businesses land on our soil and create a root system if we eliminate the regulatory overhead and the tax problems that we currently have. Those two things, I believe, would create certainty in our economy.
So a few months ago, I had the honor of spending the day with both senators in Washington. I got to run behind them as they ran to meetings in the hallways of the Capitol building, and it was an amazing experience. And that leads me to this next question. What do you like most about being a senator, and what do you like least?
Let Tim go first.
That's what I like least about being a senator. Being the junior one, that is. That was a joke. Anyways, for me, I'll tell you that, interestingly enough, I'm a Southern boy. I truly love South Carolina. So one of the things I like least about being a senator is you can't do it from South Carolina. You actually have to go to Washington and do your job part of the week. The thing I like most about being a senator is having an opportunity to travel the country, and specifically travel our state, and focus my attention on the opportunities to have conversations with high school students throughout South Carolina. I have found amazing potential in our schools. Some of the most brilliant people that we've ever seen are locked in our schools, and to the extent that we can unlock their potential, I think we'll find ourselves in a strong position. On a serious note, the least attractive thing about being in the Senate really is the partisanship. One of the things I experienced with Rita Allison and Tommy Stringer and others who are in the room tonight is that even though those of us who are Republicans, we would have strong disagreements with our Democrat friends, at the end of the day, we'd huddle together and try to do what was in the best interest of South Carolina. Sometimes I feel like we're missing the point that people aren't looking for Republican solutions or Democrat solutions. They're looking for American solutions. And we get locked in this psyche about partisanship.
Amen. As a lifestyle, it sucks. But I really enjoy the job a lot more than the problems that come. I live in the back of my car as a lifestyle. Got 240,000 miles on it, by the way. Sell it to you if you want it. Buy me a BMW next over in Greer. You know, I got on the plane in Washington about 2 weeks ago, and the flight attendant says, "This is flight 1, 2, 3, going to Greer, South Carolina. The lady jumped up by me and says, I gotta go. I said, why? She says, I'm going to Greenville. I said, trust me, you will get there. So anyway, you know what I like most about being a senator is having a say. I've been a lawyer, and I'm for the loser pay rule, even though I'm a lawyer. If you sue somebody, great. If you lose, you ought to pay the cost. To all the lawyers in the room, we can do better. Now, the bottom line is representing our state and my nation. I've been an Air Force officer for 31 years. Tim's 2 brothers in the military. He comes from a military family. But wearing the uniform of the United States Air Force has been one of the highlights of my life. You're representing your nation. When you're a lawyer, you're representing individual clients. I've represented towns and municipalities and counties, and I've learned a lot about the burdens of local government. But trying to find a way forward is intriguing to me. How do you get Democrats and Republicans in a room to give a little bit to move us all forward? You know the big deal I talked about, entitlement reform? I can tell you this, no Democrat is going to vote to adjust the age of retirement and to means test benefits unless Republicans are willing to simplify the tax code and take some of the money to pay down debt. That's sort of the Simpson-Bowles model. Immigration is a trade-off. You've got the business community here dying to get more visas. Believe it or not, it's hard to find workers in certain parts of our economy. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Anybody ever worked in a chicken processing plant? Anybody want to go back there? So we need labor. You know, if a kid graduates from Clemson, from India, and gets a PhD, why in the world should they go back to India to compete against us? Give them a green card. Let them stay here. Let them be part of America because they add value. So immigration reform is about economic growth. When you're losing 80 million workers, if you don't have a rational immigration system, you can't grow your economy. It's about national security. It's about our culture. So the Chamber of Commerce is a big supporter of immigration reform. You want more visas. You need more high-skilled and low-skilled workers. Guess what? The Hispanic community wants some way forward for the 11 million who live in the shadows. And one's not going to get something unless the other does. There'll never be an immigration bill where the chamber gets everything they want on the business side unless you deal rationally with 11 million. And the 11 million are not going to move forward without a guy like me and Tim who represent the chamber's interest. That's what I like most about politics, is trying to take entrenched positions and see if you can move forward. I'm not married, but that's as close as I want to get. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Senator Scott, Senator Graham. Again, thank you.
Thank you. God bless you.